Hi everybody. Ooh, yes, that's my voice. I know it's 3:30, but let's just get through this, okay? It's going to be fun. I'm going to make it fun. As Rui said, I'm Penny. I work for Company Studio. I founded this little company in Berlin. And full disclosure, I'm not a designer. So what I'm going to do now is introduce myself a little bit so that you know why I'm here. So this is me. This is my little head. I'm based in Berlin. In case it's not obvious, I'm from Australia. Back home, I started off my career in sort of like the design and tech space by being a career coach at General Assembly. I was like helping the students come out of the boot camps and get jobs. And after that, I started working at ustwo. They did Monument Valley, in case you've heard of it. And I was doing the business development there. So then I moved to Berlin. I worked with AJ&Smart, and I did the same thing. So, I mean, after that, I kind of went freelance, and that's where Company Studio was born. I've worked with clients ranging from software companies like Twitter to very sort of traditional enterprise organizations like Tetra Pak. So I kind of have an idea of like how all these clients work and how they make decisions. I just will warn you, sometimes my transitions and animations are a bit wacky because I'm not a designer. So, you know, just give me a little bit of leeway there. So Company Studio and myself, we kind of work at the intersection of design and sales and marketing and business development. And our job is to boost visibility for our clients. So people are like, okay, I know what that company is all about. I know what they're selling. And create revenue. So we kind of try and get them to sign on more clients and do more client work. The way that we do this is what I call little sprints, little baby sprints. I like to use the sort of design methodologies in the way that I work. So first of all, we decide on the goal that we're trying to achieve together. We find our target customer or client. We devise a couple of solutions to test out, and then we make it and launch it. So the way that I work is not super strategic. I'm not like, oh, let's think of a whole plan and take ages to implement. I'm like, let's get it out there. Let's prototype and test and see what lands. So the reason we exist as an organization, that's a little bit self-important. There aren't that many of us at Company Studio, but the reason we exist is that a lot of my clients are designers. So they are designers that have often like started an agency or a studio or an innovation consultancy, and they're not super comfortable with the sales stuff. They're like, oh, I don't know what to do here. So I really want to be able to provide support and guidance and support to them. Okay, so you saw my little title here. I was hoping to ruffle some feathers with this because I think a lot of designers have been in this situation where they're like, oh, this project is keeping me up at night. It's giving me grey hairs and so on. So I kind of wanted to address that. So here's where I give you a little bit of a motivational speech. We just heard from the team a little bit earlier that whether everyone is a designer or not is very controversial, right? But I think what we can all agree on is that everyone can benefit from learning some design skills. Everyone can run an experiment. Everyone can run a workshop. Everyone can think about a user experience or talk to a customer. And I believe the same concept is applicable to sales. While you might not want to be like, you know, making cold calls and so on, everyone should learn some sales techniques and tactics. I think that's super, super important. Sales doesn't have to be awkward. You don't have to lie to anyone. You don't have to manipulate anyone. You don't have to trick people. It's about influence. It's about communication. It's about building advocacy and, you know, having fun, having a nice chat with people and solving their problems. So that's why we're here today. And that's what I really want to drill into and get you excited about sales. If anyone can do it, I'm hoping it's me. So I think, here we go. Here's one of my wacky animations. So what we're learning at the moment, and I think we're really seeing this come to life a little bit, is the idea that design is no longer simply thinking about logos and color schemes and so on. It's now really becoming a way of working. We're seeing organizations adopt these design practices and turn them into real business results. And the nice thing at the moment is I'm seeing a lot more research and data around the idea that companies with a strong culture of design perform better. They have better retention, they have better loyalty, they have better customer advocacy. They also tend to have happier staff and better employee engagement. So there's heaps of benefits to design, obviously, and we all kind of know this. If you want a little statistic, I can't remember where I got this from. Sorry. But organizations with a really strong culture of design and an investment in that can enjoy up to 30%, 32% more revenue. But I guess like we've all kind of experienced this. I think often clients and businesses struggle with some of the whys behind design decisions. So I have a lot of clients who are like, oh, you know, we're finding it really hard to sell in the research part of the project. Or, you know, they might say, okay, well, it's really hard to explain why the logo can't be, and so on. So that can cause a lot of stress and frustration, and it also is a big barrier to you doing your best work. The good news is that a lot of these difficulties, believe it or not, can actually be solved in the sales process. And I think I'd be interested to know what comes to mind, and I know no one's going to put their hand up, but just think about what comes to mind when you think about a sales process. Are you kind of like, oh, that sounds boring? Because I understand that. But at the end of the day, a strong sales process, it's literally just about building trust, sharing information, and getting your client excited about working together. So for those of you who are sitting there thinking, okay, I don't have clients, this isn't my scenario, I just want you to think about this. If you are pitching a new idea to your boss, if you're saying, okay, I'd love to try Play instead of Figma, that's sales. If you are asking your team to hire a new person and you're pitching this idea of like hiring a new person, that's sales. If you are looking for a raise or a promotion, that's sales. So anything that happens before the kickoff of the thing, that's sales essentially. So if you kind of take on this sales mindset, it can be super useful. So without further ado, here are the 3 things that I think that you should get right when you're selling design, or even selling yourself as a concept. So it was kind of cool that there was 3 Ps. It just happened totally organically. I was writing the slides and I was like, isn't that pleasant? Process, pricing, and profile. Whew, I feel so satisfied with myself. Let's get started. So let's start off with the process. I know we had a little thought about like, what are we thinking about when we think of a sales process? And I know a lot of my clients are like, oh, is it going to be like all these stakeholders, all these dot points, all these decisions, like this really complex path of bits and bobs and things to do? But in reality, a sales process can and should be super simple. And in fact, I really, really get excited about things that are simple and easy to grasp. You shouldn't have to like research your sales process before you explain it to someone. Go ahead and just think about what we say, when we say it, what we share, and what happens next. And that last one is really something to keep in mind. Because when you're in the sales process, this is where you are showing competency. This is where you're saying, okay, I know what I'm doing. I'm giving you a lot of visibility over what's going to happen, and I'm building trust with you. So I like to think about the first point there was, what are we saying? What is it that we're saying? What are we doing in this first conversation? So a great example of this is in my own sales process. It goes like this. I have a screening call, I have a discovery workshop, and then I send a proposal. That's it. And so in that screening call, what I'm saying is, I'm asking lots of questions. I'm getting right to the bottom of the challenge. I'm really sort of investigating and trying to make sure that like I know all these details. I'm giving them a top-level overview of my approach. I'm not kind of getting too far into solutions. So those are the 2 what I'm saying. the next thing was like, what am I sharing? So I always let people know, okay, so after this call, I'll be sharing my overview deck. I'll also be sharing my pricing, so I'm not wasting time people who can't afford me. And then I tell them what's next. So often I'll say, okay, well, let's think about what's next. I'd love to jump on a discovery call with you. It runs for an hour. You'll need to bring these people, and this is what you'll get out of it. So giving them that trajectory to the conversation is really, really helpful, and it really helps you to look like you've got your shit together. The cool thing about sort of thinking about this stuff is that it helps you also to, when you're thinking about your sales process, you'll be able to really set and manage client expectations. So instead of worrying about deadlines and pricing and who's involved and what meetings are happening, get all of that out and like be really aware of that during the sales process. This is a great place to build trust with you and your client. So a lot of people think that building trust is just like handshakes and dinners and like these sort of like superficial gestures. But in my experience, building trust is about being really honest. Sometimes sometimes I say to my clients, I'm working on 3 other projects, so I might be a bit chaotic at the moment, but I will do my best to get this to you on time. And the other part of building trust is to ask a lot of questions. If you're doing all the talking, there's no way you can figure out how to solve that person's problem. So it's really cool to just like make sure that you're investigating their challenge really heavily. The sales process is also a place to demonstrate your skills and your methods and your expertise. Then we also want to bring a little bit of momentum and urgency to the conversation. So the worst thing in the world is when people, you have a conversation and you're like, yeah, seems like there's loads of synergy here, we're going to do really great work together, and they're like, we'll get back to you. And then you're like, but when? I'd love to know when. So what I love to do in this situation is think about what the deadline is and work backwards from there. So just thinking about like what are the tasks that need to happen before the deadline and how do we make sure that we're all going to hit that deadline together. And finally, I think a really strong approach to your sales process will give your clients confidence in the ability that you have to solve their challenge. You're trying to reassure them that you've done this before, you know the steps, you have an idea of like what the forecast looks like. So yeah, I think I'm a big fan of just thinking about sitting down and saying, okay, what are the steps that I'm going to take with my client so that we're achieving our goals together. And my little hot tip here is to make sure at every stage you're sharing next steps. So let's use an example. Let's say I work at a big organization and I'm one of many, many designers on the team. And I say to my boss, hey, I think Figma sucks. I want to try this new thing, Play. Here's why. Here's my rationale. Here's a couple of thoughts that I've had on it. And your boss is like, yeah, okay, cool. Let's come back to this. And you're like, okay, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to send you the 3 articles that I read about this and give you a few little notes to think about. And then I'm going to check back in with you on Thursday next week after your big meeting. So making sure that you are continually providing an anchor for the conversation is a really nice little way to make sure it keeps going. Okay, everybody's favorite topic, money. So, I mean, like, pricing is not just about getting rich. We all know that, like, money is super nice. But it also, you should be thinking about it as it's a tool. And I always encourage my clients to really address their pricing strategy so that they've got enough profitability to reinvest in their own skills. So if you're sort of doing back-to-back projects at a very low profit margin, and you know, one client after another, there's no time to learn, to develop, to share your internal processes, to exchange with other designers. So you want to build that into your workflow. Having money gives you the flexibility to say no. I love the moment in my own freelance journey when I was just like, no, thank you. I don't need to deal with you. And it also like stops you from feeling undervalued and kind of like, you know, you do enjoy projects more when you're kind of sold in on them a little bit. So I'm going to do the really boring nitty-gritty about like 3 different ways that you can price projects. Buckle up. So first of all, and I want to do this because I want you to be aware of like the different ways that you can attack this problem. So first of all, there's a kind of traditional classic model, which is time and materials. You're literally selling hours and days. There are benefits to this, so it means that if you're performing the task and you're doing the work, you're getting paid for that time. The pitfall is that instead of selling yourself and your experience and your perspective, you're selling time, which is like sometimes not so good. Secondly, we've got fixed pricing. This is just a flat rate that you quote at the beginning. It's not really open to change. There are benefits to this approach. Usually if you do it right, you should have a little bit of padding and you can make a bit more money in a shorter time frame. But there are risks. So obviously if you're sort of looking at the scope of a project and you're saying, okay, well there's a, this is my estimate for how much this is going to cost, that kind of leaves you quite vulnerable to doing more work or extra hours. And finally, this one's having a bit of a moment. I've had a lot of clients ask me about this, so it's kind of on my mind, and that is value-based pricing. So value-based pricing means that you are pricing your services based on perceived value, and this is what I want you to think about. What is the perceived value of your service? That's very subjective, so it can be really tricky to kind of establish a good value-based pricing model. And what a couple of the guys said earlier was, you might have a really expensive handbag. We pay 3,000 euros for this thing because it has connotations of prestige and exclusivity. So that's a value-based pricing model, whereas you can also get just a little black handbag from Marks & Spencer for almost nothing because the perceived value is lower. So I can't really necessarily tell you all exactly what you should do, but I'm going to tell you what works for me and what I recommend my clients do. So first of all, if the scope of a project is fixed, is clear and fixed, then I do fixed pricing. So for example, if you're running a workshop, if you're running training, if you're sharing materials that you've already developed, go for the fixed pricing, that's fine. And make sure you build in a bit of a buffer for profitability. If the scope is unclear, so for example, sometimes I'll do some content strategy work with my clients and we don't really know how long it's going to take. I do what I call value-based time and materials. So my experience and my expertise allows me to charge more, but I like to give visibility on how long the project is going to take and use time and materials for that purpose. Yeah, I was just looking at my notes. I'm like, did I forget anything? But I didn't. So my hot tip here, I think we've all had that situation where someone says to you, I'm going to charge you 1 million, and you're like, that's very embarrassing for all of us. But I do think, it's really great when you're thinking about pricing for anything is to just say, okay, I'm looking at my market rates, I'm looking at how much time this is going to take, and this is my price, and I'm just going to push a little bit higher than that. Just wherever I'm comfortable, I'm just going to push a tiny bit further. Don't double the number. Don't triple the number. Just a tiny bit further. And then you can incrementally add to that as you go along. Finally, so last and very much not least, is the topic of profile and how this will really help you to, I guess, like do your best work as a designer and really feel like you are valued and you're working with the clients you want to work with. And yeah, I think it's really critical to remember that there are so many designers out there. And so it's pretty important to try and stand out as much as possible. Within reason, obviously, you don't need to go crazy, but having a little bit of a consideration about your profile will really help you to get the clients and the projects that you want. And it will also help you to navigate the client relations part of the scenario. You'll be able to start, being a little bit more stronger in your opinion and get your point across a little bit more. So I don't like the word personal brand a lot because I feel like we're not products, we're people. And I do understand that a shop window is important, but I prefer the term professional profile, which is what people see and think and hear about you. So this should include things like what your approach or process is. So this is something I talk with my clients about. I say, okay, our approach is really scrappy. We do instead of talking. So we're not consultants. We're really like putting together assets for you and we're launching them into the market. How much experience you have. So, you know, if you're a designer with 15 years of experience in a really specialized space, that's a big part of your professional profile. What your interests and specializations are. So, for example, we have a whole bunch of people that spoke today with very specific specializations. Prototyping or neurodiversity or font. So typeface, sorry. Sorry, everyone. I'm so sorry. I'll buy you a drink later. Yeah, so those things all come into play when you're talking, when you're sort of pitching yourself and when people are thinking about you. Another thing to consider is like, what do you believe in? And this might not be sort of really high, lofty purpose goals, but it might be things like, I personally believe that sales doesn't have to be embarrassing or tacky. It can be really building genuine relationships. What makes you different? So for example, with me, I dropped out of university. I don't have a degree. I'm just like fudging my way around. And who you are as a person. So I think Penny brought this into the picture really nicely. She showed who she really is, and she let that drive. Sorry, she's dying. So when we're building, okay, now the animations here are going to get really funky, so just stay with me. So when you're building your profile, I want you to really think about one thing first, and that is, what are you saying when you talk about yourself? So I work with a lot of people who, if you said, tell me a little bit about yourself, they'd be like, oh, well, I'm a designer. And I'm like, yeah, got that. So, you know, maybe it's worth sitting down and being like, who am I? What do I do? What do I want? What do I sell? That's one of the first and foremost little elements of building a good profile, is just getting really clear with yourself about what it is that you do and stand for. Step 2 is figuring out, what is your purpose? So for me, I feel like the company studio and my individual purpose is to really empower designers and set them free to change the world, because I really do believe in design. I get really excited about all the possibilities, but I'm a salesperson, so I'm like, my purpose is to enable people and empower them to do their best ever work. I told you. Okay. Step 3. We got there. So this is a really interesting one. I really like to think about, what are your skills as a professional and what are you doing to continuously improve those? So when I worked at ustwo in Sydney, we did this. I was doing a really good job as a new business person because we had all these new clients and we were like, okay, we have to hire all these new designers and developers. And one thing that really stood out to me when we were hiring these people was not just what their skills are currently, but what their potential was. And how I would judge that potential, you know, I was nice about it, but how I would judge that potential was their passion and how they had these skills that they already had, but then they were also like, okay, well, I really, you know, I make these little things in my spare time, or I'm part of this meetup, or I just read a really cool book, and, you know, thinking about how it is that you are progressing as a professional. Because that's stuff you can share as well. That's something that people will really remember about you. It's super important to think about what type of work you want to do. So it took me a while to realize I don't want to work with startups. They give me a headache. It's not for, I mean, some people love working with startups. It's not for me. I like working with agencies and I like working with small enterprise clients. So like getting a little bit more clear and also expressing that to other people is super important. I often think, like, if you're at a meetup or something and you're actually sort of wanting something out of the meetup, it's nice to say, oh, like, I'm a designer, I specialize in this, I do that, and I'm really looking, at the moment, I'm looking for a new job in a bigger design team, because at the moment, I'm the only designer, and I want to hang out with more people and learn from them. So kind of just like being not afraid to express what it is that you want. I pressed it, I swear. Okay, great. Now, I think a lot of people struggle with this one. What does make you different? And I really think that while we are all equally special, we are all obviously equally not special. And it's just about thinking, well, nobody's radically different, right? But like, what do you believe? What is kind of like the thing that makes you stand out just a little bit? And I've got a tip on how to find this thing after my last button here. Finally, what is it, and we had to talk about social media, right? So what is it that people are seeing and hearing from you on social media? And I know like a lot of designers really hate LinkedIn. That's silly. Don't hate LinkedIn. There is no other place on the internet where you can literally talk to and promote yourself and talk to people who could hire you or could work with you. So get on there. You know, what are you sharing? What's your point of view? What is the thing that people should follow you for? I encourage everyone to think about one LinkedIn post that they could make in the next week that might provide value to their audience. You don't have to do this big hard sell and tell everyone how smart you are, but you can, which does happen for sure, but you might share something you learnt at this conference today. Think about the value you can provide. So my hot tip when it comes to thinking about your profile, because some people are like, well, there's so much information to take in here, is to start by thinking about the best things people say about you. So just between you and me, no one has ever said that I'm highly organized. Ever. They say other things, but not that. So that's not a sort of position that I'm going to work around. I'm not going to be like, hey, client, I am so organized and I will never forget anything. That's not going to work for me. But when I think about all the nice things that like my bosses have said and my clients have said, I'm building my profile around that. To recap, your sales process is your secret weapon when building trust, confidence, and excitement. Pricing should reflect your ability to bring value to a project, and it's really important to talk about this confidently. And finally, building your fabulous profile will really I can't promise you this enough. Putting time and effort into this will very much empower you to do your best work and find the best people for you. Thanks. Thanks, guys. If you want to get in touch, that's a typo. It's actually Penny Blackmore, and I feel like you might appreciate that because you're a designer. So that's an A, and there's the rest of the information. And if you want a copy of the slides, even though they're a bit janky, you can let me know and I'll send them to you. Thanks.